Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode. My name is Steve White, and I created and designed the Steve White podcast just to give you a place of empowerment, inspiration, wellness, and positivity. I hope that you find some healing and strength while I help you to see the beauty in the grey area. When we look throughout history, it is apparent that stories have many functions. They act as blueprints, they inform, educate, inspire, and perhaps the most amazing part of all, we all have one. Madison Gonzalez is an empowerment poet, public speaker, and Storyteller of the Year award winner. She turned to writing as a form of healing after her crippling battle with postpartum depression and anxiety following the birth of her son, and catapulted into great success with her book Dear Mirror. However, she didn't just bask in her own success and glory. Instead, she dedicated her time and experience to giving others the platform to share their stories. Truly humbled by your presence. Thank you, Madison, for joining us.
It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to, be able to speak to your audience and hopefully shed a little light on the power of stories.
When I first came across your work, I saw instantly that your writing comes from a place of experience, but also saw how others may be able to tap into that very authentic and raw space within their own lives. Tell me, what does storytelling mean to you, and how has it impacted your life?
Storytelling is something I kind of stumbled into, if you will. Obviously, we all have passions for stories, and we may not even kind of realize how much they really impact our life, starting at such an early age, even, with bedtime stories and television and just all the different ways that we consume media. The most powerful way to, get a point across is to give an example, is to show, not tell. So when, you're doing storytelling, it's called storytelling, but really you're story showing. You're showing somebody an experience, something that's happened or something they can learn from. And so I really became passionate about storytelling when I realized what a tool it is to kind of be a guide, and to be a connector and to be a healer, for others. And also just kind of realizing, how powerful it is when you feel like your story is heard. And so, we might get into this a little bit more as we, get into our conversation, but I really noticed how important it is to feel like, your life matters, and, everything that's happening, um, is for a bigger purpose. I won't say everything happens for a reason, but I think there's something to be learned from everything.
Mm.
And so I started working for this nonprofit organization in my hometown, which is Indianapolis, Indiana. And we serve the terminally ill homeless. And so these are people, who have lost their homes. They've lost their health. They're terminally ill. It's a hospice home. Many of them don't have a support system or a family anymore, which is, what led them to us. But they all had stories. And that became so apparent to me so quickly, was there is still something so valuable to be learned from each and every one of these people, each and every one of these lives. And these people shouldn't be forgotten, just because they don't have someone to pass, next of kin, per se, to pass their story on to. They shouldn't be forgotten. Nobody deserves that. And so I started kind of collecting their stories and sharing their stories. And I watched them just, how peace, would just spread across their faces. They're telling
Mm.
their story because they're feeling like, what, my life was worth something, and I have something to share and something to leave behind. And that was just everything for them in their final days.
Mm.
So, after doing that for them, I kind of thought to myself, well, maybe I have a story, actually. Maybe I actually have a story myself. And I started just kind of thinking back on my life and what it was that I wanted to stand for, and what I wanted my life to represent. So I started sharing some of my own personal stories, and got really just, incredible feedback. I mean, I didn't expect people to embrace my life story so well, or be so open to it. But, that's the power of it, is we're all craving that authenticity, and connection. And so, after After I started sharing my story, I was just like, you know what? Everybody's got to do this. It just feels so good and it just feels so powerful. And, if I can encourage other people to do that, that's what I want to do. So here we are.
It's interesting because I was first drawn to your writing, but then when I started to really look into your work and I heard you speaking at the conference about Morning Light, it definitely resonated with me, as I have a strong passion for people who, struggle with adversity, and it really, was close to home for me. And the thing that stood out to me is what you said, and you've just, briefly said it there, that these people have lost their families, their homes, their health, but you can't lose your story. And I thought that was such a powerful message to share. A lot of people have gone through experiences and where they feel like their life is falling apart and they can never get things back, and they've lost, like you say, home, family, friends, and health, and they feel worthless. And ultimately, all of those experiences, it's like they're being collected into a bank of a story, and there's something powerful about that. And one can say that all we really have and leave on this earth is our story. Some people call it a legacy, others call it a memory. And while I agree with this, I think there's something very special and powerful in engaging with our stories while we're still alive and sharing them.
I love that. Yeah. You don't have to wait until your story feels like it's completed to start sharing it.
Mm,
You're living your story right now. And I think, that's something that I try to encourage as well is you don't have to wait until your life feels perfect and like,
hmm
okay, great, we're at the happy ending part. So now I'm going to start sharing my story. Because I think that as you start to share your story, you can also start to write your story, and
mm,
continue to push through the story that you want your life to mean. And so, I always encourage people, you don't have to wait. Like you said, it's not like, okay, that was done. Now let's start telling grandma's story. You
mm,
can start sharing your story now. You can start, using your story to make an impact. And that might just add all these layers to your story. Like for me, for example, it's kind of changed the course of what I'm doing now. Learning about story and then sharing it. Not that everyone's going to have that same thing happen, but I think when we reflect back on our stories, we can really see these breadcrumbs that they've been leaving us, right?
mm,
Like we can start to see these kind of golden threads of values, of things that matter to us. Because I think something happens, when you start to play this narrator role and you kind of step back and you go, okay, let's see, what have I experienced? What have I been through? What have I overcome? What am I overcoming? What are my goals? You start to like get to be a witness in a way
mm.
to what's important to you, and what you're proud of, and maybe what you're not proud of. So, what do I want to change? And you get to really kind of blow that all wide open so you can take more of a creator role in your own life, and you can continue to start, okay, well, maybe this happened. I wasn't proud of this. Maybe this happened. I'm very proud of this. And what is it that I want to continue to stand for, continue to do? And I just think that's one of the most powerful things we can do, ultimately in our whole lives.
I think that's so important, and you just touched on a really interesting point. I hadn't really thought of it like that. They say, when you do meditation, your role is to not judge the thoughts that come into your mind, condemn how you feel, or the passing thoughts that are coming and going kind of thing, but it's more to be an observer. And I feel that that's the case when you become a storyteller and you take ownership and authority of your story. You still go through the experience, but you now become separate to the experience, in the sense where what you're going through doesn't define you, but you can see it, experience it. And being an observer, sometimes it can kind of detach you from the emotion of it. You kind of go from being the lead actor to maybe the director, from a perspective of optimism and saying, well, actually, now that I can see what's happening and how this is playing out, next time I could do this better, or I could approach this situation differently, or even look at it differently. When you're in it, you cannot see the bigger picture, because sometimes we're so consumed in the feelings of our story and not actually the bird's eye view of the story.
That is exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, the bird's eye view. It's
Yeah.
taking that, 1,000-foot view of your life, and you can kind of see it almost more clearly that way. Because exactly like you said, when you're in the middle of it, it's pretty hard to, kind of find the direction that you want to go. But if you can kind of look at it from, okay, let's look at the whole picture. Let's look at how this has led to that. Let's look at how A has led to B, has led to C, has led to D. You can kind of draw this map, if you will, of the choices you've made, what you're about, and what you want to be about, going forward. Like you said, you can become more of a director. I mean, that's why I call myself an empowerment poet, because I think, what we're talking about is that empowerment factor, where you're
Yeah.
not just a player in your story. Like you said, you're not just a character. You're like, no, I think I'm going to be the author of this thing. I actually have power in my choices, in what I'm going to do with this, in my experiences. And using that to really feel proud about yourself, feel in control of your own life, and then also find the direction you want to go.
And one of my favorite scriptures, it speaks about gifts. It says that your gift will make room for you. It's something that I've held on to for a very long time, and my story illustrates this quite clearly, in that once you step into your gift, doors do open up for you. Once you're aligned with who you're supposed to be and doing what you're supposed to be doing, I guess your life purpose, it makes room for you. That room looks different to everybody. For some, it may mean they end up being rich and famous. The right people see them and connect with them. For others, it may just be being fulfilled. But your gift does make room for you. On that note, there is definitely a turning point. And for you, it was, the experience you had with after giving birth to your son, that it, I guess, triggered you to move in a certain direction. And then after that movement, your gift then made room for you. But what I want to know is, what was that like, that period when you were feeling these feelings and the anxiety and the depression? What was that like for you? And what was the point that made you move?
So I knew quite quickly, with the birth of my son, that it was going to be a very different experience than the birth of my daughter, which was 2 years prior. When I had my daughter, Julia, it was like everything I had thought motherhood would be. It was this new baby, and, I felt like super mom, really. I mean, I did all the good mom things. I took her to the park and library dates and kept my temper and ate right, and it was just bliss. And so then when Bennett was born 2 years later, it almost hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, even just in the hospital, I just felt like, okay, this is a different journey. I felt like that dark cloud, physically kind of descend over me. Because I say, and, I know that you advocate for mental health quite a bit too. So, I always love these open conversations on this, because I do think it's, under discussed. It's a physical thing, depression and anxiety. It's a physical thing. It takes over you. It's not just like a feeling, or like I'm in a bad mood. It's like every fiber of my being feels off center. And when it came to what I'm lucky with, something I'm blessed with actually, is my family is very open-minded about that kind of thing. My dad actually runs a counseling center here in town and has done so for 30 years. And so, mental health, luckily for me, was not a taboo. It was something that I could kind of own pretty quickly and say, like, okay, I'm going to take action on this. Now, what I will say is I took action, and, I went to the doctor, and I started trying to get treatment and feel better. But healing can take a really long time. It's like a broken bone, and it's not like, for some people, it is like, I'm going to go to the doctor, I'm going to get, maybe put on medication, or I'm going to just find this, therapist, and they're going to fix it all. And for those people, that's amazing. In my case, it was very interesting because it took a couple years. Like it really did. And it took persistence. And so I always tell people, it's a process and I'm, doing all the right things, I thought, and I just wasn't getting any better. And that, losing hope, that losing of yourself, it can feel really, really hard. But I think it's so important to, cling to what's important for you in those moments. I mean, for me, it's my kids, just telling yourself that this isn't you. This isn't permanent. This isn't forever, and to continue to be persistent and aware of what you needed. I mean, it's so weird. I say it's so strange to know that something's off and to know, this doesn't feel right, and not feeling in control of your emotions, not feeling in control of your thoughts, but not knowing quite what to do about it, except to keep moving forward. And that's really all you could do. So in that instance, for a while, it really just felt like surviving to me. It really did feel like, I just got to get through this day, and then I'm going to get through the next day, and I'm going to get through the next day. But eventually I came out on the other side, and eventually I had a story to tell. And, it was through the combination of support and resources, which are definitely out there, finding a support system, finding, groups you can join, and, therapists, or trying different medications if that's right for you. And ultimately changing my environment was what I needed. And this is like a really major point to my postpartum journey was, I had always thought that I was going to be a stay-at-home mom, and I absolutely place like no judgment on, if you want to be a stay-at-home mom, if you're a working mom, like, whatever it is, but this is what I thought my life was going to look like. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And so kind of realizing that I'm not cut out for this, quote unquote, or I, felt like that at least, but it was like, I need to make a change to my environment because this isn't working. This kind of everyday routine just wasn't working for me. So I decided, it's time to go back to work. What I know now, when I reflect back on my story, is that postpartum depression is ultimately this pain that pushed me towards my purpose, because the job that I took was at Morning Light, where I started to work with the, terminally ill homeless, where I started to tell stories, where I started to tell my story. And it kind of is this amazing thing, thinking, look, that dark time in my life is actually something that pushed me to one of my greatest sources of fulfillment, which is what I do today. And which is, making an impact, I hope, and telling my story and hoping to resonate with others about it and help other people feel empowered in their journeys and in their pain as well. I think sometimes it's ultimately our pain that can really show us our ultimate purpose.
I find that so interesting because I always say to people, who a lot of people say, man, I want to be an author, or I want to do this, or I want to do what you do. Where do I start? Or, I don't have the resources to do it. And some saying that I always say to them is that your job can fund your dream. And I'm usually speaking financially, but what you've just shared there shows that the same can ring true, but on a personal level. Your job ended up being the thing that pushed you into your dream. And it's, again, about seeing that bigger picture. One would say that the postpartum depression was a problem. And in the case of me, say my health or whatever it, led me down this path, they would look at that in the moment as a problem. But without it, you wouldn't have a best-selling book. You wouldn't be doing the things you're doing today. And so it was almost essential. So like that maybe that was your training ground, your PhD in this was, that was what you had to go through to be who you are today, and impact the lives that you've impacted. You had to walk the walk yourself. And so, as well as, going through the experience yourself, there is obviously a lot of science behind storytelling. And I know that from your speeches that you don't just speak about from only your personal experience. You do pull on the science, and there is some strong data to suggest the huge benefits of storyteller for both the teller and the recipient. What are some of these benefits?
Completely. So, there's an article that I always reference, actually, that I found pretty early, in my research of this, because I love psychology. That's one of my like pet passions. Like I said, my dad's a therapist, so I grew up asking for the DSM, for Christmas, because I just think the brain and thought and yeah, just ultimately the science behind why we do what we do is
Mm,
so interesting. And so Psychology Today actually has a article out, and it's something I reference quite a bit, like I said, called Resilience and the Four Benefits of Telling Your Story. Um, and like you said, it can benefit both the teller, because it's very therapeutic, it's very cathartic, and the listener because they're learning something. We've all been impacted by powerful stories before, where you kind of watch someone and you think they have similar symptoms to me. They went through something similar to me. How did they handle the situation? How can I, maybe replicate some of the things that they've done so that I can avoid some of those roadblocks or at least just feel less alone? Just that feeling of, community is so important. But they say reason number one is realizing that your story can benefit someone else. Because the thing is, we've all encountered things that we didn't deserve.
mm,
And we've all been through things that, life has given us that we just really didn't need, right? We thought we just really didn't need that. That's just not what we expected for ourselves. It was difficult. But if you can kind of understand that, yes, I had to go through something that was very painful and very difficult, and I probably wouldn't have chosen that for myself, had I been given the chance. When you can start to see that your story can be an inspiration for somebody else and
mm,
see someone else maybe struggling with our same, like I said, same symptom and decide to implement certain changes or just feel like they've got a hand to hold throughout it, um, that's extremely healing. It doesn't take that pain away completely, of course, but it's extremely healing to feel like maybe, there was some kind of something to learn from this and a connection to be made and a life to be impacted. And I think most of us, many of us are just out here living life trying to make a difference. And
mm.
your story can do that. Reason number two, they say is you're able to kind of find your voice and maybe make sense of some of those life's events. So kind of, what I was alluding to before is, your perspective can change when you start to tell your story. So it's not so much of kind of a victim mindset of like, oh, this is happening to me. This, life is happening to me kind of thing. It's, this is happening and this is what I'm doing about it. This is happening and this is what I'm saying about it, and you can kind of take more of a creator role in your life, and that paradigm shift can really be everything, psychologically. um like I said, I mean, our struggles can kind of show us parts of ourselves that we may have never volunteered to meet if we were given the choice, but overcoming them can introduce us to parts of ourselves we would never want to live without, you
Mm,
know this strength, this resilience, this compassion, this empathy, this connection, these relationships. When you think about your life, how many of those things would you not have had you not gone through some of the struggles that you faced? And would you want to give those up ultimately? It's just really interesting questions to ask yourself. But taking the time to stop and see all the things that you've overcome, all the obstacles you've conquered, will show you how strong you really are. You take that narrator role and you can say, wow, like I'm strong. And you can apply that to your mindset in your career. You can apply that to your mindset in your relationships, and just your life as a whole. So our stories are not only teaching others and benefiting others, but they can teach us things that we didn't realize we needed to learn about ourselves as well when we start to review them.
mm,
The third reason that they quote is, or that they say, is, again, kind of reaffirming those values. So, what are the golden strands of, consistencies? When you start to narrate your story, what characteristics are more prevalent? Like, is Is, respect super important for you? Is, like you said, tailoring to people who might have to face adversity. Is that super important to you? Is protecting children important to you? Is, what are these things that you are constantly revisiting in your story? Like, wow, I do a lot of that, or that was really important to me a lot. What does that tell me about myself? You can kind of reaffirm those beliefs that way. And then finally, they say reason number 4 is finding peace and hope. And I think, when we talk about healing, finding peace and gaining hope are the 2 pillars. It's making peace of things that might have happened, and then finding hope that maybe, despite these things, you can still live a life that you love and that you're proud of. And I quote a lot. I don't know if you've ever heard Lisa Nichols speak, but she's one of my favorite speakers here.
Mm.
And she quotes, I don't know if I'm going to get this, word for word, but she says, it's not in spite of your past that you get to be amazing. And it's not in spite of your past that you get to be a change agent and transform lives. It's not in spite of it. It's because of it that you're perfect for such a job.
Love that.
And I love that because it's like, it's not, oh, I've overcome all this and look where I am. It's not in spite of it. It's because of it. You've gained these skills, these insights, and these experiences throughout your story that then you can use to apply to change your life and change the lives of those around you. And so psychologically, scientifically, when you think about brain science, it's just crucial. It's just so important when it comes to our psychology to feel like we have some control over our life. And I think, really owning your story and claiming your story is essential for that. There's also a ton of fun science, if you want to discuss some of the fun science in terms of chemicals produced in the brain when somebody's hearing a story, which can be really applied to, I do a lot of speaking and teaching actually for other nonprofits because, storytelling, when we can share the stories of the missions in an effective way, we can tug at the heartstrings better as well. And this can be applied to, business, nonprofits, like I said, but also relationships. If you can get good at telling stories and communicating either your story or other stories in a really effective way, and you know this, Steve, because you're a storyteller yourself, you can open minds in a way that you can't if you just kind of beat them over the head with stats and statistics and all of that. But one of the first chemicals that you can produce, and I'll also give a little tips as to how you can do this and what types of stories produce these, because this is the fun science behind it. So dopamine is one of the chemicals you're trying to trigger in an audience. And, they say dopamine is everybody's favorite party guest because when our brain's learning systems are activated through dopamine, we experience, excitement and pleasure and joy. And, you're probably familiar with the term dope. It comes from the nickname dopamine because it causes your audience to really feel something. And when dopamine's activated, it helps them with their focus. It helps them with their memory. It helps them with their motivation. And so you're really capturing your audience in kind of a full way. And so if you want to do this, we just kind of did it actually. We did it with a hook or a little hook or, piquing of the interest. So do you want to hear about this? Are you excited to hear about this? And then everyone kind of sits up and is like, yes, please tell us more. And so you can do it with kind of a suspenseful statement, a cliffhanger or a little kind of plot twist at the end, which is some of my favorite. I always love the little plot twist. I try to do that with my poetry a lot. Cortisol is another one, which is a chemical that is actually a stress hormone. So you want to be kind of a little bit careful with this one. You don't want to just flood your eyes, or they'll be crossing their eyes, arms and rolling, sitting back and tapping out because they're feeling stressed, and no one, enjoys feeling stressed for too long. But it is effective because it can be, a warning. Kind of one of those take note. When cortisol is produced, your brain's okay, I need to be kind of hyper aware of something. So, stories with a little bit of danger or high emotion or intensity can make your audience feel this. But again, it's kind of like, let's introduce cortisol and then let's like switch gears quick so we can like flood them with, oxytocin, which is another one, which is like a bonding hormone. This one's super, super powerful because oxytocin is actually the same chemical and hormone that floods a woman's body after she's given birth. So, if you're really looking to kind of gain those either business relationships or obviously personal relationships, stories that expose a little bit of the underbelly, kind of like my postpartum story, like that's a personal thing. That's a little vulnerable. That's something, kind of close to me that I am sharing because I would like to connect with people on a deep human level. And so oxytocin, to produce that, you're going to be sharing stories, that have high emotion, or just make your audience feel more human and being honest and maybe a little vulnerable, which takes bravery, of course, but ultimately can be very rewarding if you can kind of increase those bonds. And then stories are also one of the fourth one. So you have four reasons to share your story, and then 4 chemicals that stories can help with, and that's endorphins. And I don't know if you've ever seen Legally Blonde, but the quote in Legally Blonde is, exercise gives you endorphins, and endorphins make you happy, and happy people just don't kill their husbands. Because it's supposed to be funny. Like endorphins is kind of that comedic, fun. Just, gets your audience laughing. So it's a little more slapstick. It makes them feel happy. It makes them feel good. But like exercise floods us with endorphins. So if you've ever had like a runner's high, that's endorphins. That's just that feeling of like, oh, I'm elated. I'm like so happy. So, all joking aside, it's telling funny stories and silly anecdotes that is going to kind of produce that humorous moment, that happy moment, maybe an embarrassing moment, something a little unexpected, so you can kind of trigger those endorphins in your audience. So putting it all together, if you can tell stories that add interest, excitement, make people comfortable, make them, interested, like I said, or just maybe even a little cautious, like there's something to be learned here, listen up. And then bonding, of course, with the oxytocin, you have a very captive audience and you have them very ready for action, whether you're trying to kind of, move them on a mission or get them involved with something or just connect with them better on a human level. Stories can do all of that for you.
Because those chemicals are so important, and essentially some of the medications that, are prescribed for mental health illnesses and conditions, those are the chemicals that are targeted as well as serotonin. And so it's really important, I guess, for everyone to know that if you're struggling out there, I'm not saying in place of your current treatment, but that there are things you can do, and that storytelling could be one of those things that can actually release some chemicals in yourself and in other people, and even in your dialogue, just in general with other people. Just realize the impact of your words, that they can actually provoke some of these chemicals within other people, and you're more powerful than you think you are. This is why when you walk into a room and you can just say, oh, the energy was off, or actually I really like the energy of that person. It's a real thing. The stories that people tell and the way they communicate are quite symbolic of this.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, we are obviously very social creatures, and it's a scientific thing, communication, sharing stories, telling about your day, listening to someone's day. I mean, I think this is a great opportunity to also encourage more listening. So many, motivators and gurus are constantly saying, talk less, listen more, because if you can listen to other people's stories and consume other people's content, reading, podcasts, just stories, these are the reasons that they help you feel better. These are the reasons that can help you feel more connected to each other, because it's literally a brain thing. It's a brain reaction. It's a chemical thing when you are listening. as well as sharing. Like I said, those were the four reasons to share. But I mean, these chemicals could almost be like four reasons to listen, because our bodies need these things. And so that's why, if you're feeling isolated and disconnected, have a conversation with someone,
Mm.
ask them about their life, ask them to hear about their backstory, their childhood. I think a lot of people shy away from that. This is actually a point that I always like to make as well, especially when I'm training nonprofits, because a lot of people have been trained not to ask people personal questions.
Mm.
It's almost a taboo. It's like, well, I don't want to touch that. I don't want to offend someone or make somebody uncomfortable, which of course you need to be careful of and cognizant, read the room, read the body language. But in my experience, and I've dealt with, homeless individuals who are, terminal. This is a vulnerable place, but in many cases, I am one of the only people who's ever asked them to tell their story.
Mm.
That's so powerful to just ask someone to tell their story. What was life like for you at this point? Where are you from? Like, asking these questions, people want to be heard. People want
Mm.
to be remembered. People want to feel connected. Um, so, in addition to encouraging people to tell their stories, I also encourage people, ask to hear stories. Ask
Mm.
your grandma, ask your mom, ask your brother, ask your friend, ask the neighbor, ask the Starbucks, barista. Like, everybody has a story to tell, and many of us don't feel like we make a daily impact. Many of us don't feel like we are very connected. And you could do someone an entire favor by just asking them to share some of their story.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point, which is going to lead on to my next point, in that not everyone is called or is destined to become an author or a poet or a motivational speaker or anything like that. But storytelling doesn't have to be done in a public setting. This is something, and you just touched on this, you can have with just your family and friends, and finding about your family history and your ancestry. And, these things are just as impactful as you being a bestseller, because essentially you're getting a wealth of knowledge that you didn't have, and you can essentially extend your family's lineage of history just by having the knowledge, having the stories to pass on to your children. They pass on to their children, and you get a fuller picture of where you've come from, and the sense of belonging and knowing that actually I'm here because of this, and this happened before me. I think that's a gap in a lot of people's lives today, is they don't have a purpose, or they don't feel they know their purpose because they don't have a sense of belonging. And I think that storytelling and having, that back and forth, and some history that you can apply to your present, that can give you that sense of belonging and feeling that you're part of the story. That chapter is significant because it continues on from the prior chapter. And even if it's not just the family side or friendship, some people don't have loved ones, just engaging with other people who have different perspectives than you do, so much can be learned from having those types of conversations by listening to different cultures. Within my traveling, speaking and listening to people speak, what they eat, why they eat it, where it came from. My knowledge on a lot of these places has grown, so when I go to visit, I feel at home. That place of belonging again means that you're not bound to your geographical location or to a circumstance, but the story has made room for you. A lot of things in life like that are transferable, and while storytelling is an art that we often see through film, literature and photography, I'm aware that not everyone would define themselves as a creative, but the way we live our lives could be a form of storytelling. The lives we encounter, the level of empathy, love, patience and generosity that we show. As authors, people can fall into the trap to think that this is our only means of communication, but we're regular people, and between writing books, we still live our stories beyond the pen. And I want to know from you, away from the writing and the poetry, do you feel you communicate your story in other ways?
I love that. That's a great question, and that's so spot on. I love what you just said. Storytelling is a way to make something abstract, like a culture, personal, and bring it from this kind of general idea to here's a face and a name and a human being that you can put this to. And so, in terms of storytelling, aside from poetry and writing and speaking, I do think, you just touched on it. It's those day-to-day conversations, trying to connect with other people just on a human, everyday level. You don't have to be on a page or a stage, constantly. That's not for everybody either. It doesn't have to be for everybody. Some people don't want to be the center of attention, and that's okay. But yeah, just finding people and finding a community that you do feel comfortable communicating with in an open and honest way. That's part of your story. Also, just communicating your story to yourself. I definitely encourage people to share their stories because I absolutely believe that you can make an impact. Everyone that you encounter has at least one thing that you can learn from them, like hands down. If you're open to it and you're willing to kind of find a nugget of wisdom within each person. I definitely believe that. But also just journaling. I do a lot of journaling. I have so much stuff that I've written that I will never probably even share because you don't have to. Part of it is just processing your life for yourself and processing your experiences for your own benefit. And so, yeah, I have journals and journals and journals that, it might be horrible writing. It might be terrible, but it's not about that. It's just about, dissecting your experiences so that you can feel like you have a good perspective on yourself. And so I definitely encourage people to do that too. If that's not, if their calling isn't, writing books and speaking on a stage, just write to yourself, and art is also a form of storytelling, if you're an artist. But like you said, if you're not a creative person, I just think it's still really important to know yourself well enough to know what it takes to connect to your story. So think about what it is that you can do for self-reflection that feels authentic to you, because that's huge. Like, part of telling your story or owning your story is about that authenticity. It's not about necessarily writing it, or reviewing it under some rose-colored lens of, I'm gonna be a poet today, and you can't stand poetry, like, that's okay. You don't have to do it the way that I did it, the way that you do it, the way that a lot of people do it. It's just about thinking, okay, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? Or what kind of, empowerment do I want to gain from this process? And what feels right to me? What feels good to me?
See, I know that there's going to be someone listening right now who perhaps is on the verge of giving up, and their brain is cluttered. They don't know how to release some of these traumas or the emotional instability, and they've heard you, and they can relate to, more than relate to, they can identify with your story, and maybe that's enough for them. But perhaps there are those who they don't know how close they are to activating that power of expression like you have. What advice would you give to that person?
I would say that it takes one experience away from finding your power. For me, I didn't even know I enjoyed writing poetry until 2018. So I never wrote a poem. I didn't identify as a writer. I didn't even know I had it in me. I think what I would say is, again, connect with yourself and try different things. Because I had no idea that poetry was going to be my ticket to feeling like I had something to offer. I had no idea that that was even within me at all. And, as I was going through postpartum, I do want to emphasize too that while I started journaling and trying to process some of this stuff in the middle of it, I'm going to quote my dad, actually. I was having a conversation with him the other day, and he said, no one's writing a poem in the middle of a hurricane, right? So if you're in the middle of it, don't feel like, oh, okay, here's one more thing I have to add to my plate. I have to start, producing this creativity and I have to start producing this content. Sometimes it's just about embracing the fact that you are in the middle of something. But when you are out of it, and you will get out of it, you are going to have something to offer. And it's not permanent. And it feels like it. I mean, for me, postpartum, it was 2 whole years. And that's a really long time for someone who wakes up every day and is having panic attacks and is having, like, I don't know if I can get through this day. Is calling their family and friends like, I can't do this anymore. I mean, that was literally me. And, I did not know how long it was going to last. And it feels like, every day I can totally identify when you're in the middle of something like that, every day feels like a huge challenge. But I am so, so happy I didn't give up. And I am so, so happy that, I'm here and I learned something from it, and you will too, and even if you don't see it right now, even if you are in the middle of the hurricane right now and you are just trying to get through the rest of the day, keep getting through the rest of the day. Wake up and do it again until you feel better, because you have so much power in being that survivor and thriver when you're out of it and you don't even know who needs you. You have no idea who's needing your story on the other side of this and all that life has to offer you on the other side of this. And I know that feels maybe far away, but it could also be tomorrow that you find that ticket, that healing, that sense of I can do this. And also definitely reach out to other people if you're feeling like you're struggling in that way. Good for you for listening to this podcast. First of all, that shows me that, you're still fighting. The fact that you're tuning in, and don't be afraid to ask for help either, because I couldn't have done that alone for sure. Definitely couldn't have done it alone. And luckily I didn't have to. And, on the other side of it, here we are. And I hope that's encouraging.
Thank you for that. And so you now help storytellers to share their stories. Do you do that in a specific way? If someone was to contact you and they've got a story to tell, is there a space for them to do that?
I work with individuals who want to start sharing their stories. I have clients who call me and we work together to try to figure out what the best way for them to do that is. Like I said, everybody's got a different voice, a different way that they want to share their story. And it needs to feel authentic. And so, I always say, like, I am not going to be telling your story, but I will help you tell your story, because it needs to be told from you, because that's where the power lies. But a lot of people, they feel like I have this whole life that I've lived. I don't know which part to share. I don't know which part, is important. And so we just work together to kind of identify those things and then figure out the best medium to do that, to share that.
I will definitely put all of your contact details in the description of the podcast. The part that just really stood out to me is, you're not there to write their story for them. The power of storytelling is the individual's voice and perspective. And so the power of storytelling is you. That's really the message today, is that the power that lays beautifully in the art itself. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of this wealth of knowledge, experience, and power. I'm sure many people will be inspired by what you have shared today. And I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. This was great.
I do hope that you enjoyed this episode and take something away from it that can impact your life in a positive way. Please read the show description for more information on my guest and links to where you can see more of my works, and subscribe if you want to hear more. No matter where you are in the world right now, or what you have been through, or what you are currently going through, I want you to know that this is not how your story ends. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay blessed, and I wish you better days.